Corgi. Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. And this is Tristan, he's a Corgi, and we're here for an episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And we are creeping up to our 150th live episode this week. It's pretty exciting. I said to my sister in December when she started doing it, I didn't think I could do it for a couple of months. Now it's been months and months, and there's plenty more I have to offer. So we have no end in sight for Conversations with a Corgi. So today we're continuing our talk about emotion code work. And as you might recall from our episode a couple of days ago, emotion code is a powerful way to release trapped emotions from your pet's body or your own. And it is a way that you can move past behavior issues that don't seem completely resolved, or get a leg up on something you're working with your pet. It can be a really helpful thing to do for a rescued pet to help them let go of issues from their past. It's sort of, some rescued pets have like PTSD. I watched a TED Talk the other day about the Michael Vick dogs that were used in fighting, and they were rescued, I believe it was by Best Friends. No, it was another group. And they rehabbed them, and they became wonderful family dogs. So if a dog has gone through such a horrific experience as that and can turn around and be a great pet, our animals are capable of so much emotional resilience that we're not even aware of. And emotion code can be one part of that. A typical example is a dog that I've worked with who, like so many, experienced the loss of another pet in the household. And after that, she became pretty bitey, barky, not friendly with other dogs. And her person, who's a trainer, has done so much great work with that dog. However, there's just this lingering moment when her eyes shift and the person with her becomes aware that something could happen. And trying to overcome that, to really make that dog so deeply secure that she does not feel the need to attack other dogs anymore. We did a couple of sessions of emotion code, and we all think that it's helped. The dog is so well managed at this point. She is not attacking other dogs, but part of that means that she's not also allowed to get too close to other dogs because, like my boy here, she's a little insecure. And so she needs a lot of confidence to be around other dogs. Tristan met another dog at work yesterday. It's an intact male. He usually likes the ladies. I always refer to him as like Pepe Le Pew because you can almost see him speaking French and offering roses and champagne when he meets the ladies. Tristan. But with boys, he's not always so friendly. Sometimes he is. If they're younger than he is, no matter what their size, he loves a good romp. But he also can be very bossy with puppies to the point where they're terrified. So it's really important to look at all angles of why your dog is exhibiting a certain behavior. And as with this dog that I worked with who has been so well managed in her attitude towards other dogs, the emotion code work was just the icing on the cake to just make that shift more deeply within her so that she can find the confidence. So what you do in a session is release these trapped emotions that are attached to physical, psychological, emotional issues that your pet may have. And your health is really a result of how balanced your energy field is. We talked about that with flower essences. We talked about that with the tuning forks. We talked about that with the chakras. Illness starts from the outside in. And so the more you can do to balance the whole animal and the energy field around the animal, remember the electrical field of the heart extends 8 to 12 feet from a human. So depending on the size of your dog, that's pretty far from your dog. So there's still energy affecting your dog from that distance away, at least. They're super sensitive animals. Even, the whole model of prey versus predator animals, all animals are super sensitive and can detect things at great distances that might harm them or benefit them. So I don't think we do dogs or other animals a service when we talk about their emotions being limited or their senses being limited or their ability to find input from great distances is limited, because in fact they're exquisitely sensitive. Their senses are so much better honed than ours. We rely so much on our visual field that, you know, our sense of smell and taste and hearing is not what our dogs are. So what we do to affect the energy field to correct a situation in emotion code work is use magnets. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this work with magnets. However, what we do generally is use magnets to run over the governing vessel meridian, the governing meridian in acupuncture, which is down the middle of the head and down the back of the neck. And of course, interesting to me, that's right over the central nervous system, which is where fight, flight, and rest, digest is modulated in the brain. And it's also right down where the spinal cord is, which is part of the craniosacral system. And the fluid moving in that system is very important to one's health as well. So the magnets are used along that governing meridian to release the emotion. And you identify these trapped emotions with muscle testing. And then that work can therefore be done long distance. And as you recall, the muscle testing is just, for me, interlacing my fingers and asking yes and no questions and seeing if it's a solid hold or a weak hold. And that will tell me whether I'm on the right track. So that's what we do. And then you can also, after a session, what happens? Often people are a little what we call emotionally labile, which means they're a little up and down, a little off, don't feel quite themselves because they really are a new self. And the same thing can happen after an acupuncture session or a series of sessions, certainly after a craniosacral session or a series of sessions, or after massage sessions sometimes, rolfing. Many modalities create a little bit of disbalance after the session as your body adjusts to the new way of balance. So it's important to give yourself time not to process the emotions because they're released immediately and completely, but to adjust to the new feelings you have in your life. So your dog or cat, if we've done a session to help him get along with the other family members, the other cats and dogs in the household maybe, he may find himself being a little more nervous around them, or being a little more bold approaching them, and then a little nervous as they interact with him. And it may take him a few days to see the full ramifications and effects of what's happened with the emotion code session. So it's really important that you be sensitive to your dog's changes, or your horse or your cat's, after an emotion code session, so that you can keep him as comfortable as possible. It's not like just because a trapped emotion for this dog I was talking about that makes her very assertive with other dogs, just because that emotion's gone, she's not going to be completely new immediately. You know, she has a lot of old habits. So part of having a successful session is having that owner or dog guardian be really cued in to their dog's behavior and affect for the next few days, so that they can make sure, for instance, with an animal that's learning to adjust to being with other animals, that those experiences are all good for your dog. It's not a time to go to a dog park and say, oh, little Tristan, he can hold his own in the pen with the big dogs. I'm going to put him in there because we did emotion code work. Bad idea. We'll re-traumatize my dog. And, you know, you're so kind of emotionally vulnerable after a session. It would be much better to say, okay, my dog is processing how to be with other dogs. Let's have him play with his friend for the next couple of days so that the dog can kind of try on his new self and understand what that's about. So it's really important that you're aware of these changes for a few days after a session. And then the other idea is that trapped emotions are released completely and do not return. And that's important to know because, you know, it takes multiple sessions sometimes to completely release a trapped emotion. And people are like, well, why isn't it happening in one session? Why isn't it completely released? And part of it is you have to phrase the questions you ask so clearly and specifically that you are really addressing only one piece of the problem at a time. And that is why it's so effective and why the emotions can be released completely. And getting back to an example I gave a few days ago about being in like 7th or 8th grade and at a dance and nervous and maybe wearing high heels for the first time, or interacting with kids you don't know, or, you know, not knowing how to dance, not really comfortable in your body. All these things are going on. So there's so many layers of what you're feeling. And your specific question may be, do you have trapped emotions related to your feeling uncomfortable dancing in public? And so that is one specific aspect, but there's all these other layers of emotion. So it may take many sessions in order to fully release all of the trapped emotions around the issues that are related to that feeling you had at that dance where you weren't happy. So with our pets, the same kind of thing. I know a particular dog that doesn't get along well with Tristan, and I have done a few emotion code sessions for that dog. And that dog just has so many layers of anxiety and dominance around other dogs. It has not been helpful that he has had to live with his less dominant brother his entire life. He's very insecure. It is very hard to be in charge all the time. It leads to health breakdown, which he's experienced in a profound way, and all kinds of emotional issues with insecurity. And that's one of the things we've learned from animals. I just posted on my Facebook a great talk about dominance in dogs from a woman in Haifa, Israel, and she was pointing out that in fact dogs want to be our friend, want to work with us. It's not about dominance. You are doing a terrible disservice to your relationship with your dog and to your dog personally, or your horse, your cat, or your rabbit, if you work with them through a system of dominance. That is coming from generally male, ego-driven ways of looking at the world from the early 1900s and 1800s. It is not valid. And even the fellow that did some of the initial research on pack dynamics with wolves later realized that all the wolves he was working with were from different packs, and that's why they weren't getting along. And really, in nature, animals get along better than we have thought. The only animals that don't get along well are chimps. Chimps are constantly engaging in battles to see who's in charge. And yes, we're closely related to chimps, but we're also closely related to gorillas, not fighting to see who's in charge, and another little chimp-like animal, little black thing, he's so cute, called a bonobo. Bonobos, a matriarchal society, no fighting over dominance either. So, it's a very small percentage of the animal world where dominance is a huge issue. Of course, we want our territory just like we want our home. And of course, we don't want others moving into our territory, or we have our favorite ladies like wild horses do. But it's not about dominance. It's about other issues. So with our dogs, the same thing applies. We do not want to treat them in a way based on dominance. And so there's tons of new research now about your dog wanting to work with you as a partner and have a relationship with you and improve your relationship with your dog. And so doing emotion code work can just be another layer of that to help your dog relate to you in a deep way and to help you relate to your dog. So a lot of people call me for emotion code work to clear up some of these issues from the dog's past life, especially if they're rescued, that may be interfering with their ability to bond with their person. And we've talked about some T-touches you can do with that. We've talked about heart walls, and emotion code sessions in general can really increase your bond with your horse or dog or cat or rabbit. And it does make a big difference in how they relate to you. And so it's really important when you're doing emotion code work to think of specific questions that you need to ask your pet. And we will do a little session here tomorrow so you can see more of what that's like. But the question matters so much because you're going to be asking it repeatedly. And animals can release up to 25, 30 trapped emotions if they have a lot going on and they're ready to move on to a new phase of their life. And so it's really important that we have that question honed down to something really specific. And I will have to look back through some of the sessions I've done to give you some really good ideas of specific questions we ask. So generally the magnets we use to release those trapped emotions are these guys, the Mag Boys. They were super popular a few years ago. They're super available on Amazon and eBay because people are getting rid of their old Mag Boys because they haven't used them much. But what we do with these are very powerful magnets. That makes them quite strong and really good to affect the governing meridian. And so what we'll do to release a trapped emotion is just run this 3 times, since I am doing this for the animal, down my governing meridian, down the middle of my head, which is, interestingly, right down the suture in the middle of your skull. You're affecting both sides of the brain at the same time, getting back to that whole idea of the right and left brain. And then for more ancient emotions from relatives or the distant past, we will run this down the governing meridian 10 times. But for a general emotion that we would find on this card, we would just run the magnets down the governing meridian 3 times on myself, because I am being the dog that I'm working with. So, and I'll show you how we do that tomorrow. And let's just take a closer look at this card. A chiropractor developed this. Nelson is his name, his last name, and he is really a genius to have made this so easy to do, and it's helped a lot of people and animals. So we have 2 columns here, column A and B, and under each column are rows, 6 rows, right? Yes, 6 rows. And in each of these little squares, we have 5 emotions. So when you're asking the dog questions, you'll say, is it in column A or B? Is it in an odd or an even row? And then you'll pick the specific row. So then you'll find the trapped emotion. And let's say, we've picked up the one dread. That comes up a lot. And notice dread is different from fear, horror, conflict, crying, discouragement, rejection. There are many, many choices here. So something like dread is different from fear, and that's where the intelligence of this card is so great, because we have really specific levels of emotion that we're dealing with, and dread is a little different from fear if you look it up. The other interesting thing he's done related to the physical medicine, and of course emotion code is the beginning of what we do, also called body code, and that is layers and layers of charts like this for different parts of the body, and that can release emotions that are related to different organs and specific areas of the body, because often we hold these trapped emotions in a specific location where they're kind of out of the way so that we can function. And then, if you don't release them one way or another, you may end up finding that you need your gallbladder out when you're 65, because so much has been held hostage there all these years that you haven't released. So in the first row of emotions, we have the heart and the small intestine. And then in the second row, we have the spleen and the stomach is related to these emotions. We have the lungs and the colon in the third row. In the fourth row, we have liver and gallbladder, which we know from Chinese medicine is related to anger. Anger is where you hold anger in the liver and gallbladder. Grief, for instance, is held in the lung, and we'll see here, in fact, grief and self-abuse and layers of emotions associated with grief are in that lung section. And then, of course, what do we have in the liver and gallbladder where we see anger? Anger, bitterness, guilt, hatred, depression, panic, taken for granted. Row 5 is the kidneys and the spleen, and those emotions include things like blaming, peeved, unsupported. And row 6 is for the glands and the sexual organs. There we have emotions like pride, shame, longing, humiliation, lust, and there is a loose correlation with some of the chakras with these rows that are related to the organ systems. So it's a pretty easy system to use, but there's a lot of thought that went into creating this, and it's very applicable to many systems of the body when you do emotion code work. And certainly releasing a heart wall can be really liberating for a person or an animal, and it can really just improve your relationships in every area of your life in ways that you didn't even think you had issues. So the emotion code work is super powerful, as is the body code work, which we are probably not going to be talking about right after this. We will be moving on to another area, because the emotion code is what I do primarily for animals, and I want you to be aware of what that's about in case you might need a session at some time, or there's people all across the world that do this work, so you can always find someone in your area not everyone works with animals, and I think that takes a special skill to understand animals' lives and where these emotions came from, and to make suggestions for supporting the animal related to what the findings in the session are. So that's always helpful. But as I said, it's done long distance, so you can find me or a couple of my colleagues around the world who can do this work for you and your pets. So that's all we're going to talk about today with Emotion Code, is just some of the general ideas of how to work with it, why you'd want to use it, and how it affects your dog. Tomorrow, or your horse, your cat, or your rabbit, and tomorrow I will do a little kind of demonstration of a session. I think it's sort of disrespectful to whoever to be doing a live session here, so I'm not going to do that. But if I had somebody who said, sure, use me, I would certainly do a live session. But we're just going to do a quick demonstration session tomorrow so you could get an idea of what goes on in an Emotion Code session, because it does sound a little out there for some people. It's long distance and we're using magnets, and but it really does make a huge effect on the animal's life. And certainly some of the animals I've worked with, I can give you some examples of the emotions that they've released. And like often when I do several sessions for a pet, there may be, there's a lot of emotions on this card. Like, what is there? 60, there's 100 and something emotions on this card. And is that right? That's not right. 6 times 5 is 30. Yeah, there's 60 emotions on this card. So anyway, sometimes a particular emotion like shock will come up in different years of the animal's life, like at age 3, shock, 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 age 4, shock, 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 because you ask them their ages as you go. And then you start to think, okay, so how can I address this issue of the animal being shocked? Like, what was going on in that time? And I don't mean like shock with a cattle prod. I mean like, oh my God. Or, being hit by a car, and then you're in physical shock and also emotional shock. So one of the things I would suggest, because of my experience with animals, is that a person who finds that with their dog or their cat, work with the shock point on the ear, the acupuncture point on the ear for shock, up here on the tip. And then also just general T-touch ear work would be really beneficial for an animal that's having that issue. And the thing about shock that's particular, and I actually have just worked with a human who has an issue with this, is that once you've been in shock, your body in any kind of a healing session can easily go back to that emotion of shock. And so it's really important that you be able to manage that for your dog. For instance, you may be walking down the road, let's say he was hit by a car before you got him or after you got him, and maybe it wasn't even a big accident at all, he's fine. But you may be walking down the road and perhaps a huge truck goes by and he's not really close to your dog, but it's enough to scare your dog. That's when that awareness you learned from the Emotion Code session will come into play. You will want to work your dog's ears immediately to get him out of that place of shock and fear and trauma that he had with the original accident, and to calm him down so you can enjoy the rest of your walk and keep him safe. Right, Tristan? Tristan's wearing another one of his new bow ties. Should we put it on as a bow tie so you can see? It's very cute. He looks good in blue. It's a little vintage. It's got like little bubbles on it. Tristan, do you have any comments? He says, when am I getting my snack? So thanks for joining us today for another discussion about Emotion Code. We will continue with this tomorrow. Hi, Pat Stetz. Good to see you down in Florida. It's going to be 80 here. It feels like Florida. I love that. Today I have lots of work to do on my TED Talk. I have a couple of new clients I'm seeing this afternoon, human ones. And I have perhaps a telephone TV interview next week if I can squeeze it into my schedule. I am just a little overwhelmed right now until I get this TED Talk under control. And I had a little insight this morning. It seems like whenever I'm in the shower, I have a lot of insights. Even though I don't have a lot of stress in my day-to-day life, those insights are still coming in the shower. So maybe I just need to stand in the shower for an hour and everything will be fine. I think a lot of people would think that was a good idea. Doesn't happen in the bathtub. So we'll see you tomorrow at around 8:25 for a further look at the Emotion Code work and how it can benefit your pets and your horses. Someone needs a bath. Thanks for joining us today. And if you look on my website, www.sallymorganpt.com, you can also see a new article that came out that I contributed to about massage for your dog or your cat and some things you can do and how that benefits your pet. It was an article that was on Chewy.com. So where I often recommend people buy their pet food if they live in a place where they can't get super high quality food. Chewy's great because they will ship frozen food and things that you can't always find at your pet store. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye, Pat.